Good evening, Nabil. Thanks for agreeing for the interview. For everyone watching this interview, Nabil is a young research scholar. He's associated with IISc Bangalore as a project trainee, and then he's a PhD candidate at Center for Studies in Science Policy. We have been a research colleague also, as well as he's someone who has been working along with me in the domain of digital humanities. Nabil, beginning with your involvement with IISc, you're associated with DST. So, what are the kind of roles and responsibilities as someone who is already enrolled into a full-time PhD program that you kind of contribute? You would like to elaborate?
Uh, the role was actually it was a project trainee role, so it was a fairly limited role. And I basically, if I have to tell my major contribution, I basically worked on an open science platform, and
Mm-hmm.
we were working on this project, which was also conveyed to principal scientific advisor,
Mm-hmm.
and it was about how to make publishing more accessible. It was about how to make science more open,
Mm-hmm.
and it was not on the end user base, but it was on how we basically how the people who are working behind the desk, the people who manage those journals,
Mm-hmm.
how to make those procedures as easy as possible, as accessible as possible, as open as possible.
Okay.
Because we usually see that reviews are we are working in a blind review world,
Mm-hmm.
but we need to make it more open. So we are proposing open peer review systems. So the idea was basically based on that,
Okay.
and that's
Uh,
where we were contributing majorly,
okay.
and we were trying to compare certain.
I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
I have
you're fine.
unmuted you. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So Nabil, I got, but then a lot of people who get into IISc get associated with project training position and those kind of do you think how did it help you, because you are someone who is associated with digital humanities and you said you worked on open source platform as far as research publications are concerned, how do you see it affecting your own research, the kind of work that you are associated with?
I mean, I see it as complementing my research rather than disassociating me with my own PhD research
Mm-hmm.
as such, because I get to experience new things. I get to learn about what is open science, how open platforms work, and I believe when we are working in digital humanities,
Mm-hmm.
so we need to know more about how platforms function, how these platforms help people, and how what are the limitations of these platforms. So in that sense, it was really helping me in my PhD to understand how platforms usually work.
Okay. Now talking to this whole idea of one nation and one subscription. Now, since this is the
You are
organization is,
touching a very controversial area.
yeah. So, you associate you like you're doing your PhD and then you took part in a open platform for publication. You were associated with government machinery in outside, if I can put it in a very straightforward terms. So I was going through one of your publications, right? And I would quote, you said it would not address core issues like improving the quality of research output, developing more practical research metrics, and preventing corporate publishers from monetizing publicly funded research. Rather, you suggested that a digital publishing platform with open peer review system should be there. So what I get a sense that you propose something new. You like, I think you're not the only author, there were two more authors were there, but then how do you see open peer review system working in terms of research quality in India? Because when I say open peer review system for digital humanities, we do not have many academicians who are working in India in that area. So what I personally came across for the many times very reputed journals, they could not understand how I'm trying to connect multiple streams into digital humanities. And I get it directly because yeah, we do not have scholars who are directly working in digital humanities. So people tend to approach different subject areas from their own domain. It's like, people touching an elephant and, giving their own perspective. So how do you see this whole notion of
I believe
open
this
peer
is the
review?
plus who understand the interdisciplinarity.
Okay.
People usually don't understand the interdisciplinary nature of the research currently going on, and I feel that this is a issue, and it would be a lot of harder to address that, because although open peer review would usually help people in understanding what the, if I talk about a journal article which is published in open platform and has an open peer review, so we can easily understand what are the nuances of that paper through even the comments of the reviewers, because usually those are also the questions we need to address, and
Sure.
people should know about that part also.
So true.
So although I agree that there are not a lot of researchers in interdisciplinary areas which could understand, but yeah,
More than
I believe.
interdisciplinary, I came across was digital humanities. Yeah, the kind of scarcity is there. So how do you see in terms of gatekeeping, differentiating between quality research and non-quality research when we have open platform for a research publication? How do you see that happening?
I mean, it's happening everywhere, but there are archives. You can put your papers on archive, which are
Mm-hmm.
open to all, and anybody can read without being peer reviewed.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I believe a peer review is also an important part of the process, because there are a lot of things we miss usually at times when we are writing papers, and which
Sure.
should be addressed in our papers.
So, okay. Now coming to this whole idea of, uh, ethics when we talk about, so your MPhil was something associated with ethics and algorithm. Can you just throw some light upon it?
I was basically trying to see how those programmers, those coders, try to defend what they are coding, or is there any sort of dilemma in. I was saying that, yeah.
Hmm.
I was saying that most of the coders usually, their ethics are usually driven by how organizations think what they need to do.
Okay.
The organization vision and mission are the main driving forces of their ethics too, because
Okay.
they are just doing what the company is telling. So I believe that more often than to bring in ethics in the employees, we need to look into the organizational setting. How is the organizational, how is the organizational behaving internally? We need to study that too. That is an also important aspect of what we do.
You mean this whole idea of cross-cultural and, ethics we have in our society, and that it affects the knowledge creation and any platform creation. That's what you're trying to
Yes,
say. Okay.
absolutely.
So now I was going through this whole notion of digital ethics, and this is an area which is, now being talked upon. And how do you approach this whole notion of digital ethics? What is digital ethics for you in your whole understanding?
So for me, how I approach is I believe that technology, what we are using, is the main thing we need to understand. It is not what they are saying that it is.
Okay.
It is not about the features of the tool. It is about how it is being used, how it is affecting us, how it is creating social culture, and how it is creating material culture, what we used to say when we
Okay.
are talking about, we're just talking about humanities rather than
Okay.
digital humanities.
Okay.
So we need to understand about how we use it. So I take it as how we are using it. If I'm for my PhD, I'm taking algorithmic culture and management. So I'm talking about how are we using the platforms? What are the role? What platforms? How platforms are creating culture, and
Okay.
how people are being managed through those platforms. So it's
Okay.
about mainly the use
Okay.
for
So,
me
okay. So,
personally.
like you said, how people are approaching the platform or the tool that is being created. So, that's where this whole idea of multidisciplinary approach comes up. And you say the person needs to be well versed with philosophy, sociology, different aspects of life. So what was your experience? Like, this one question which I'm trying to explore these days. Like, I would narrate you an incident when I was personally discussing this with it was dean at this Humboldt Institute of Indian Studies. So there this whole notion comes up, how people are taking up things, the whole knowledge creation. And when we talk about platforms, how do you see approach these questions, these aspects?
I mean, when we talk about platforms, we need to also understand that each platform is behaving a little differently. Not every platform is behaving as same as everyone else's.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Facebook has its own version of culture manifestation, and Twitter has its own. And if we talk about Ola, Uber, they are all creating different types of sociality.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to, now what I feel, what I am going to do in my PhD is also taking a case-based study, so that we could at least document a platform to how it manifests.
Okay. Now, the most important aspect at the point of discussion that came out then was that, in India, there is a problem that when we talk about platform studies, the discourse is majorly dominated by three people from three specializations. One is lawyers, who are having a large chunk of say when you talk about private public policy platforms and all. Then when you talk about platforms, majority of the focus goes on the whole notion of fake news and debunking myths and media studies. So you have journalists who are mostly talking about it, and activists who are explaining their own experiences, documenting it. Somewhere down the line, we do not have a middle path where we have interference of academicians or someone from social science to give a academic perspective to it. How you are approaching this problem when you are writing, or you are working on your dissertation, or how do you see it and how do you approach it?
I mean, to tell you the fact, we are so late in studying digital platforms that it's already has been done. We have passed the vantage point.
Okay.
So then now you see so many scholars jumping into it and doing everything, like lawyers, because we didn't have any law on even private data protection is coming just now, and whatever it is coming, it is there. But it's so late that so many people have come up with all their notions and understandings. But what I feel is reporting is a different aspect, and writing thesis is a totally different aspect. I'm a research scholar. I will be writing a thesis, and it would have to be a much more comprehensive, more theoretically and more empirically, rather than what people on Twitter are doing.
No. Why I asked you this question is because since you are someone who has worked upon open platform for research publication, you have kind of experienced it, and you have kind of proposed policies and worked upon it. So when I see someone as an academician approaching the problem of platform, so you tend to visit and revisit the problem from legal aspect, social aspect, sociological aspect, cultural aspect, historical aspect. But when because too much of information these days is being created. So I have even seen conferences organizing with keywords like disinformation platform, and when you go there you will find there's hardly any core understanding or discourse upon it. So when you are around the cloud of information, which data which is doesn't make sense. So how do you see, as an academician, someone working on digital humanities, then to have a say among lawyers or to make sense? How do you feel it is? How do you see the whole situation in India specifically?
In India, you also know that there are certain organizations, basically lawyer firms, which are making laws for us.
Yeah,
And
true.
I mean, we don't have the power to, you understand, we don't have the leverage to make them understand anything. They
Mhm.
are in themselves everything. They know everything, even though they do not understand what technology is, what technology is about. They do not know any theories about
Yeah,
technologies or as
true.
such, or any history of how it is being created and how it affects.
Mm.
But yeah, they just know the legal aspects and what it is. It is the only thing that matters for a country which is so late in making policies.
Okay.
So that's why we see a lot of lawyers, lot of
Okay, so what I was saying was, when we are doing research, we have been doing, and you are doing right now research, and you see, you have group of academicians who are part of, various committees in, as compared to our counterparts who are studying in Europe or who are studying in America. They are part of various committees, and when you come out or post your PhD, like when you will be finishing your PhD, how do you see the difference in terms of exposure, and in terms of understanding, and in terms of the documentation of the whole research is concerned?
I mean, to tell you the fact, our, even in terms of academia, our curriculum is so static that if we don't catch up with the current academic curriculum, we are lagging behind in every sense. I
Okay.
mean, if I'm studying digital humanities, but my
Mhm.
coursework was uh, fairly unrelated to what I
True,
am doing currently now,
true,
and I don't see any major revisions in curriculum also.
true.
So my basic, what my basic could have been much better, but it is not. It is up to me to do whatever I have to do to understand what digital humanities is, or whatever the platforms I'm studying, what they are, what technology is all about. It's all up to me. So now then, when we see that these certain things are not introduced in curriculum, so
Mhm.
how often do you think that it will give me any exposure in any
True.
institute or in any government facilities, faculties? It is
Mhm.
very difficult for me to get into that. Although we are seeing people, and one of the major issues I feel is that while doing my PhD in specifically in India, people don't usually encourage people doing PhDs to work. I
Mhm.
believe that it should change so that we can also understand the normal research in normal institutes go on, and so that we can also understand their methods, we can also understand how they think, how they do the research. So
True.
it could be more interactive rather than being a very static.
Okay, Nabil, so just very brief, I want to know, how do you differentiate this whole idea of knowledge process, knowledge creation, and knowledge management? How do you differentiate the whole understanding of the three aspects?
I mean, this has been so far for uh, I mean, the process is all about how organizations are, what are the tactics they are using to create knowledge, how what are the things they are doing in the process of creating it.
Okay.
And in terms of creation, I mean, to tell you the fact, even knowledge creation takes place near the water filter.
Mm-hmm.
When people are drinking water, they exchange knowledges. I mean, a guy from IT sector would be standing near to a marketing team and telling him something about how they do certain things, and
True,
he
true.
might pick it up. So
Mm-hmm.
knowledge creation is a very dynamic process, and in the sense it is very spontaneous. It could occur at any point of time. It is
Okay.
not certain that it will occur in certain point of time. In this process, it will only occur. It could occur in any point of time.
Okay.
And to talk about management, it is, when we talk about management, then we are obviously talking about administrating the knowledge which is being created,
Mm-hmm.
how we are disseminating it, how we are using it to, even if we talk about organization, how organization is using it to create money or to create profits.
Mm-hmm. So, where do you see the whole notion of ethics coming into picture? I mean, from where ethics should be, and where ethics is right now entering into picture? Like where it is right now entering into picture, and where do you think it should be entering into the picture?
Ethics should enter into the picture at the very beginning till the very end, but we don't see any such thing going on right now, because when we are so much fast pacing the innovation thing,
Mm-hmm.
although we do have a notion of responsible innovation in academics, but I usually don't see this happening when we talk about innovations, especially in India, when we are boosting that we have so many startups and so many things going on
Mm-hmm.
around in terms of technologies on in all aspects in healthcare, in every sector. But we trying to think about what implications it is going to have. We are not even thinking about what implications it's going to have. We are just trying to innovate certain things.
Mm-hmm.
We are trying to think that we'll think about the implications after when we have developed. It's like
Okay.
Facebook when developed the Ray-Ban glasses.
Mm-hmm.
It said that we'll think about the privacy issues after
Later on.
launching it.
Okay.
We won't think about it before.
Okay.
Why should we think about it?
Okay.
And the other thing is, I mean, we are too late to talk about ethics. We don't
Mm-hmm.
need to talk about justice because so much injustice have already taken place.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you have worked
Okay.
around the concept of Aadhaar, and you understand that how
Yeah.
long back it goes.
Okay. Yeah. I get, but then how do you see demographical disparity affecting person participation in knowledge creation, or knowledge recording, or archiving, or talking about it in terms of demographic location? Like if I say your demographic location, how it affected if somebody has to record it, like how the information, the whole everything took place, how you feel that you are behind the whole discourse, current discourse, and how someone who is putting up in suburb or countryside, a researcher, for example, like you are in JNU, you are sitting in Delhi, if somebody who's sitting in some universities in Uttar Pradesh or Bihar or Jharkhand. So how they'll be approaching this problem. So how do you see demography playing a role into it?
Demography is playing a very major role. I mean, I'm sitting in Delhi, I'm sitting in JNU, I'm a very privileged researcher.
Okay.
And somebody who is sitting in Uttar Pradesh might not even know how to write a thesis. I mean, even usually we also don't know, but
No, I'm saying, when how do
you
you
can
see it with someone who's sitting in Oxford, or somebody sitting in Harvard, and they doing it and you doing it, and then somebody sitting
Sorry,
in
give me one moment.
Mhm.
Yeah, what were you
Yeah.
saying? Sorry.
So how do you see it affecting? Because I am talking in terms of lot of issues, because when we talk about digital accessibility and digital rights, this whole notion that internet connection is there everywhere now, and everyone is connected to internet, so people can access any information whatever they want. If that is the case, then how you approaching your research is different from somebody sitting in Harvard or Oxford, or how somebody sitting in Uttar Pradesh or Bihar and doing research on same topic. How do you see the whole process,
I mean, it's
and
more
how do
about
you see the role of open platforms in that context? Yeah.
I mean, it's more about the environment a place creates. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Oxford Internet Institute would certainly be having a more vibrant environment and more focused environment towards the digital humanities.
Mm-hmm.
If we consider the case of JNU, or if we consider the case of our center, we are not so focused on the environment around me, is not so focused on digital humanities. So I usually get to connect only 2 to 3 people who can understand what I'm talking about and what I'm saying, and they could give me something back. But
Mm-hmm.
talk about the same thing in context of an university in Uttar Pradesh. You can understand how things will be going there.
But
When
then
they
how the
is,
open platform do you think will solve this problem, or will it play any role at all, or will it play no role at all?
I mean, platforms in terms of, if you're talking about publication platforms, then it will certainly help, because it will help them to understand what are the core issues that are going on. Like if a paper is put out on an open peer review platform, then they can also understand from the reviewers' questions. I said this before also, that so that they can understand what is the current problem going on. What is the thing the reviewer have pointed out, and what they can study further, which which the author has already missed or has left because it was out of their scope. So people can pick up from there also, and I feel this is a very good thing to start with. And also it gives you a broader overview of the things, like what the reviewer is saying, what the paper is about, and how the reviewer is reviewing. I mean, it tells you a lot of things about, I mean, it also tells you about how to review things. One of the basic thing.
Okay. How do you see your career path going on in terms of completion of PhD, and how do you see the whole notion of career after PhD? Because the kind of scenario we are in right now, COVID, and every next week you get to listen that number of cases are rising, and then you kind of, because we, at least by the time I was finishing, we had a culture of people going for conferences and interacting. That was one way of meeting new people, which is now very much restricted. And so the online platform is there, but then it has its own sets of biases and limitations. How do you approach your career? I mean, after PhD, how do you see, or during the PhD, how do you see things going on?
I mean, I feel that things are going very badly for me, in the sense that whatever the conferences are apply are usually virtual, and
True.
I cannot visit places. I cannot meet new people, because for online platform, I'm just sitting there and I will just read my paper and will disconnect. That's the usual case. We usually don't we usually don't interact with people so much. Either there is a Q&A session in the end, and if you are very lucky, then they'll pick your question, and you would have an interaction with them. And interaction is very limited, in the sense that how I would see my future. The point is, when I'm doing an interdisciplinary research, and a government that doesn't give so much recognition to these sort of researches, like for the faculty positions, there aren't many positions for us. Yeah, I mean, you are also.
So let's talk it very openly. Let me put it very. Okay, let me put it very bluntly. In India, I don't see any teaching opening if you don't have if you have not cleared NET. That too in your subject in which you have done your post-graduation, you cannot approach the whole idea of teaching in a government university until unless you have done your PhD from abroad. And even if somebody was coming from a central university, top ranked central university, you cannot do it. Then other option comes up is private universities, and I don't I don't think a lot of good universities, they offer SNT course in digital humanities yet in India. So we do not have any fully functional digital humanities course running. So at the same time, we do not have, at least I have not came across any faculty who says that I teach digital humanities. So people don't talk about it right now in India. Till date, people don't say that I'm a professor of digital humanities like that.
In India, digital humanities is marked under many things. People in management also, I mean, they would be not teaching exactly what digital humanities is, but they would be teaching certain aspects of technology, or certain aspects of management technology, certain things like that. And people also in sociology do that. People in law are doing that.
True.
But yeah, until unless we have an affirmative action from government institutions.
No, but how do you see this? How do you see this problem? Because personally, when I'm concerned, I would not like to go and teach management, because once you have dived so deep into a topic, you do not want to teach marketing, sales, and finance to any student. You're like, no, I will not teach it. research wise, then you have very limited think tanks which are doing, you know, donor based research, and you know that it will not give you the kind of kick that you want. You cannot impact government policies because, you know, there are certain you know, think tanks, law firms which are writing and doing it. So if somebody who is doing digital humanities in India, if he wants to talk to you or me or someone who's into our stream, what is a career option that you see people have in India?
In India, it is, I mean, the most I can do is to get into a think tank or a, I mean, other places like ISC which are having a project
So
on
that's,
open science or in any digital thing.
yeah,
But and the major problem is also that actually we usually critique technology, but all the research that is going on currently in India is all about talking about the benefits of technology. We can see that in IITs, we can see that in
true,
IIMs. They are talking about how great the gig economy is going to be and how great the platform economy is going to be, but they're not talking about how it is going to affect us.
true.
I mean, there's a, I mean, there's a very interesting case of how yesterday or today, Elon Musk tweeted about that people talk about AI vehicles in a very negative sense rather than how many lives it has saved. And
Okay,
somebody also put a database of accidents, the number of accidents caused due to human error. And people were like, see, AI would have prevented all these accidents, but nobody tries to understand that those accidents were in very peculiar situations. I mean, the AI was not driving in a very in a traffic jam. The AI was not, AI is using a cruise control. It is driving in the highways.
even
I mean,
Teslas are known to prone to
yeah.
accidents.
I mean, and then why shouldn't we talk about this? I mean, you can go on Twitter or on any journal platform to see how technology is benefiting all of us. But the moment you try to critique or try to ask questions to them or try to find answers to the questions you have, it get very difficult to get a job. Even if you are talking a little bit negative about technology, even the think tanks won't take you. To be very
So
frank, I believe.
I understand. So can we both agree to say that if you are doing digital humanities today, we don't have a full-time profession in India, opportunity wise?
Yes, we don't.
And the other aspect is government, or, you know, I would not say government, but then the kind of scenario we live in, I don't see any university starting course in digital humanities, because anything that you teach will is bound to be little critical, and that is not well taken.
It is not that it would not be taken well, but it is more about the focus of the current, what we can
Regime.
say. No, not only the regime, the current era or the current revolution that is going on in India. It's more about how technology can benefit us, how great it's going to be after certain years, how great things
No,
going to be. But
I'll give you examples. So I read this paper. So I have a friend from Dublin. So he just wrote this paper, and he was like, how people in America filed a lawsuit against then President Trump because he was blocking people, and by blocking those people, he was usurping their fundamental rights of reading tweets of president. So somebody said that, you know, this is my fundamental right, that the person I have elected, I I should be given right to pose question to the person. And since digital platform is kind of public sphere, you cannot stop me from speaking until and unless I do something illegal.
I mean, one thing which I feel is that all the governmental handles are using Twitters, but you cannot govern using by tweeting. You cannot govern things by tweeting. I mean, the governance takes place in a very ground level situation.
Mhm.
I mean, just by putting a tweet that kal pani aa jayega is not it's not going to work, no. It's more about how 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 it's going to be in the local level, and people also need to understand that for whatever you ask on Twitter or any platform is going to get you answers right back to you.
But then it creates news, Nabil. It creates news. Don't you think so? Like, it creates a vacuum chamber where people are engaged. So you kind of not get involved into the main issue of getting water. The whole discourse is upon someone said that water will come, and whether water will come or not from that
Yes,
date.
yes, yes.
So it's a
That,
gives you a
that is the
space for delayed
that is the main.
response.
I mean, that is the main point. That is the main point of technology. I mean, the platforms, for example, the example which I gave. I mean, just a single tweet that "Pani kal aa jayega" is more sensational than "Pani kal aaya ki nahi."
True.
So these are the social realities which platforms are creating, and we need to understand that. That's what I was saying, that we need to understand how we are using it rather than what it ought to be.
Useful. Okay. From your research on open platform, like you gave your perspective, you were part of the project. Now, if I say I have a coder from IIT who's doing PhD, who creates certain platform, and if I have a lawyer from a private firm backed by a corporate who just comes up with a law regulation, where do you see the role of social scientist or someone who's coming from a social science background who has been expert on open platform or also similar platform? How do you see him or her pursuing his career or profession in India or South Asia?
I mean, the opportunities are in abundance if we talk about digital humanities in India. I mean, there are very less researches in which we talk about how platforms are doing injustice, how platforms are affecting people's life, or what social realities they are creating. There are very less researches in India. Though the people are doing good researches, but still there is a very large scope of doing research in India. I believe that. And to put it in a really very controversial way, even if we try to copy what is going on abroad, what researchers are going on abroad in social sciences, we would create much more better social data, to put it very rudely, or empirical evidences which could
True.
help in policy making. Even if we just copy what they are doing. I mean, I'm not promoting any sort of plagiarism, but yeah,
Yeah, we can be inspired from their research.
we can start, because it will create the the things which are needed to make policy. It will help us understand what the stakeholder wants. Until unless we don't do that, there is no point of creating anything.
True.
Until unless what I want is not created, what is the point of creating anything?
True. That's true. Okay, how do you see when we talk about information creation, the whole notion of gatekeepers? So, like someone who's coming from, our culture, our social background affects how we do research, any profession, anywhere in the world, and we all have our set of experiences because the kind of cultural background that we come from. And this is my feeling that I could see someone some suddenly somewhere, and then I was like, okay, how did that happen? So how do you see that aspect? I hope you got my point. And how do you see it being a barrier to people who come from marginalized section who are into research and then pursuing their career? Because every social group has their own peer group which picks them up and pushes them up. So if you let me putting it very bluntly, if you have people from certain religious hegemony, so they have a group in European universities, they call them for talk. And if you talk people from certain caste hegemony, they have their certain peer group in good Ivy League colleges, and they give them space. But when you talk about people who are from mostly a Muslim background in India, so we are kind of non-represented in terms of academia, if I should say so. And how do you see the gatekeepers notion there? How does it affect?
Before I came into academics, or before I joined JNU, I didn't know that academics is a very privileged profession, because until unless you have somebody out there to do a favor for you, you are almost certainly not sort of nothing. I mean,
Sure.
until unless somebody does a favor, somebody calls you out for a talk, somebody puts you up in a panel, you don't have any sort of that opportunity to come and get things. It's
True.
not very easy for me to go out and do things. I mean, it takes a lot of interviews and a lot of things to just get a single internship. And people and I have seen people who just can get into Ivy League universities just like that, just by
Yeah.
getting LORs. And I mean, it is very difficult for me even to get an LOR.
True.
It's not so easy to even get an LOR.
True.
And I've seen people whose LOR is written by somebody. I mean, you would be astonished to know.
True.
So I mean, there is a very big gatekeeping going on. Even in admissions, we can see recent JNU admissions. There is a
Yeah.
gate.
A lot of talk about the kind of marking that was given to the, interviews. Uh, so how do you approach? I'm like, if somebody coming from your cultural background into PhD, or somebody trying to do PhD in digital humanities, which is a university you will try or suggest to the person? How would you suggest? Like, if you have your own self asking you that, I want to pursue a PhD or MPhil, what is the suggestion that you would give? Like, to do it or not do it in India?
I would suggest, if they have the privilege and if they have the money backing, they should go abroad, because I believe the experience there is much better than here in every sense. Even although I am studying in JNU, I still feel that I should have gone abroad and done my PhD someplace better than this.
Okay.
Because I mean, when we are not so privileged, we need to exploit every opportunity we get.
True.
And if I'm not able to exploit that, then it is also coming on me too. It's not
But
all on theirs hand.
then, even if when we talk about going abroad, I have my own personal experiences that, you feel like you are kind of exact fit for the position, and you apply, and you never listen back from them. And then you see someone who has not done research even remotely associated with the kind of work the center is doing, and then you say, okay, so this person is suddenly there. So it sends you, it leaves with you a question that, how did that happen? I don't know why it happened to me, and because of my cultural background, of, well, I'm not good in research. Has it ever happened to you, your experiences?
Yes, obviously, most of the time when I apply for PhDs abroad, I don't usually get a reply from them. Or although if I get a reply, I do not understand what my research was in during my MPhil was the exact match for what they were asking.
Mm-hmm.
But still, we don't get the opportunity. I mean, at this time, I can understand the pandemic is going on and people are mostly preferring the students from their own location. I
True.
mean, if I am applying to Germany, people are always picking people from Germany only, because there is also certain cultural differences also, because I don't know German, and those PhDs in Europe are basically project based. And to do PhD there, and I need to know the language, and a lot of cultural barriers are also there. And to go for a PhD in US is very different. It takes around 6 to 7 years to complete a PhD there, and I don't want to spend so much time to
Sure.
just do a PhD.
Okay, that was nice, Nabil. I mean, it was a lot of very insightful understanding kind of work you are doing. And like, I suppose you have 3-4 years of PhD left with you. How do you see
I don't want
Urmush? Sorry?
to take that much time. I don't want to take that much time. I
Okay,
just want to.
so, okay, even if you have like 2 years, if I would put it very bluntly, uh, how do you approach the whole notion of mental health with the kind of barriers we just had a discussion on? Uh, how do
I
you
mean,
career prospect, looking out for projects, everything? How do you, approach the whole notion of mental health, and how do you see it, the whole thing?
there's a very famous dialogue in a movie that get busy living or get busy dying. So
Okay.
what I believe is we need to get busy first.
Okay.
So I'm just trying to get myself busy into whatever the opportunities are out there, and I'm
Uh-huh.
just trying to grab any opportunity that suits me. And
Okay.
I believe that it will surely help me in getting more opportunities and better opportunities. And that's how I have planned, or sort of life is taking me that way.
Okay. Like, okay, that was very insightful, Nabil. I'm extremely sorry for certain internet disruptions. I know where I'm sitting right now, internet is not very functional, or probably today it was not very functional. I don't know. But then
You should get a Geo connection.
Geo is not working. I'm probably about, I think I should not say this because it will be it's getting recorded. I am thinking about writing on, uh, digital disparity in terms of, monopoly, because when I came over here, this whole notion was so when Geo came into India, this whole notion was, internet will be accessible to anyone and everywhere.
Yes.
Now I'm giving you my personal experience. So we had this BSNL, because universities, they have BSNL connections. So I am supposed to have a BSNL connection which is not functioning, and since it's the company which is, going down, so its employees hardly turn up. And from last 7-8 months, we are, juggling to get it connected. It's not happening. We had a Geo dongle, and it stopped working after, like, from last 1 week. So I think me and Rubina both are almost suffering because of it. So I think my phone is the only place where I'm able to connect internet and do my work. And I was discussing it with students, local students who are here, and they said it's suddenly it's well known, understand fact that Geo is not working in this part of the country. So nobody is preferring. In shops, they are saying, "Sir, Airtel le lo, Jio is not working." Now, my mind goes that, so many people have purchased Jio SIM, and they have the power of, stopping it in one go to disrupt the information or do whatever they want. Just think about it in terms of, information disparity that a private company can create if they want to. So when you let them have monopoly on internet.
In a sense, they are creating, but what your experience is, they are creating disparities. I mean, when you are not able to access internet, which is not sort of a fundamental right,
True.
that everyone should have an internet. I mean, from whatever the situation is going on during the pandemic, everything was on internet. So not having an internet was, you are not connected to this world, or
True.
you do not know anything outside your room. So internet is sort of a basic right. I believe it should be a basic right now.
Yeah, but then I'm thinking about writing, and I'll see how, I can frame it up. But then I think this story needs to be told. This is the problem, and this is my problem. I would give you an example. I was talking to someone from World Wide Web, and I was telling them I'm in Katihar. It's fine, eastern coast of India. It's a suburb, and suddenly light went off. And so they were like, "What happened?" I like, we kind of have an electricity problem over here. So, and usually we don't have powers cut, but then that day it was, and they thought, probably this is a place where they should visit. So that's reality. I think that's possible anywhere in UP, Bihar, Jharkhand. That's what happens. Kind of privilege you people are enjoying right now sitting in Delhi. We don't have, but then it's okay.
You have the privilege of inhaling the clean air. We don't have that in here.
No. I'll tell you one thing. So I was discussing this with my office like last one. I think I even posted it on Facebook or on WhatsApp status. This is a myth that oxygen is clean in Delhi. Oxygen is not clean in Delhi, and it is clean in smaller towns. I was checking air quality index. Where I am right now, this place is as equivalently bad in air quality index as compared to Delhi. And my hometown is probably worse, and Patna is probably worse than Delhi. So, people who are living here, they are more at a disadvantage than somebody who's living in Delhi. So, that air quality is bad, but then you don't even have basic facility. Yeah, that's the truth. So it's a myth that